Guys, welcome everybody. My name is Erica Sato. I'm one of the attorneys at the Law Center. I use she and they pronouns. Um, I'm a mixed race, Asian and white woman with medium hair. I'm wearing a black shirt. I live in Berkeley, California on Lishan Ohlone territory. Um, and my work at the Law Center is mostly with Indigenous and BIPOC land stewards, and then in internal work on our finances, salaries, accessibility, and interpersonal conflict engagement. And in the course of that work, I do a lot of online meeting facilitation, both in terms of um, internal regular circle meetings with like 3 to 7 people, all staff meetings of 12 to 18 people, where we talk about some of these like bigger picture considerations for our organization. And then also meetings between the teams of attorneys and our clients, as well as some larger workshops. And in the course of that, I've come to recognize how important of a skill facilitation is. Um, and I know there's still a lot more to learn, but I'm hoping to share with you all today what I've learned so far. So, yeah, this presentation will mostly focus kind of on internal work meetings for worker self-directed orgs rather than like public or really large workshops or presentations. But some of the tools might also be useful in those contexts. Feel free to drop questions and comments in the chat as we go. Um, Isel will help gather questions for the end, or if I see a question that's specific to what I'm talking about in the moment, I can try to answer it. And we won't be using breakout rooms today, but I'd love to, again, invite participation in all other ways with the full group. So feel free to drop things in the chat or have use emoji reactions. And yes, I think we are recording and we will make that available afterwards. We're having a little bit of tech challenges, but I think it should be good. So we'll start with talking about some like background considerations and then get into specific facilitation tools. Um, yeah. So I would love to start by just hearing if anyone wants to come off mute or if you want to share in the chat, what has made online facilitation challenging for you in the past? What are some particular challenges for online facilitation? I'm seeing some answers in the chat. Tech challenges like we're having, people being slow to talk or staying off camera, people being distracted, getting engagement from a big group, getting everyone to weigh in equally, brainstorming and whiteboarding conversations, people talking over each other because of the pause, the timing works differently. Hybrid meetings are particularly challenging. Yes, I am not planning to talk about that in this meeting, but that would be another good training. Um, People multitasking, trying to support people online in a hybrid meeting, not knowing what to say, people who are not tech savvy, giving space for different types of information processors and shares when some people take up too much space or making noise, attention span, disengagement, connectivity. Yeah, these are some good ones. These are, yeah. Um, Seems like everybody has experienced a lot of similar challenges. So here are the things that I kind of came up with and have experienced. It's hard for the facilitator to read like body language and vibes. You're not hearing those small noises like laughs or sighs to kind of, again, give you that more information about where people are at. Um, People might feel less able to jump in, or they might jump in and talk over each other, just like the timing and pauses works a little bit differently than in person. Zoom fatigue, multitasking and not paying attention, and then just the lack of embodiment, which I think also contributes to Zoom fatigue, just like staring at a screen for a long time and not feeling in your body, can make it hard to pay attention. So I wanted to raise up some strategies to kind of deal with these different things. And then later we'll get into a few tools to help with those strategies. Um, so because of all these challenges, I would say that the role of the facilitator is even more important online than in person. And there's no ways to really make online meetings exactly the same as in person, but there are some tools that we can use to help manage these challenges. So for the first one, because we can't read body language and vibes as well, it's important to create kind of alternative ways to find out where people are at and give you more information as the facilitator. So one example of this is like the Fist of Five tool, which we could try right now with uh, those of you who are on camera, you can just like lift up your hand, and those of you who are off camera, you could put your number in the chat. So, on a scale of 1 to 5, how scary is it for you to facilitate an online meeting? 1 is not scary at all. 5 is I'm in the panic zone. I see a 5, a 2, a 1. Big variety in the chat, lots of 2s and 3s, couple of 4s and 5s. Yeah. So this is like a really easy way to just look around and get a sense of where everybody is at. Um, you can do this as an opener, kind of like an intro that's a quick check-in, or you can also use it as a tool to just make sure that everybody's on the same page. Um, so for example, in an internal meeting at Selk, we do this like emailing everybody asking for grassroots fundraising donations, and we give people will the people who are organizing will give the instructions, and then maybe they could ask like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel that you understand the instructions and can follow them? And then, if there's any people who show like 1, I don't understand, then you have to slow down and address those things, 1 or 2. So it's a good tool for kind of transition moments. Um, just things like that to kind of help gather information. Okay, what if everybody is camera off and nobody wants to come off mute and speak? So again, this is where you can kind of lift up the value of lots of ways for people to participate. So it could be through that hand tool. It could be through the chat. It's helpful to kind of just tell people like, I want to see your emoji reactions. If you have them, give me a thumbs up. If you feel ready to move on, or a heart to show something resonates, um, or share answers in the chat. But it's also, some people are less familiar with the tech required to do those things depending on the situation. So it's good to also allow kind of like coming off mute and speaking directly for people who are more comfortable with that. Um, What if you're noticing that a few people are dominating the meeting and others are being silent, maybe because it's kind of harder for them to jump in without those body language cues and because of the conversational pauses issue? So this is where it's really helpful to have a clear structure for how and when people can speak. And that doesn't mean that you, as the facilitator, have to strictly stick to that structure all the time if you want to cut in. But for all the participants, they need to have an idea of like, if I want to speak, here's how I can do so. And the bigger the meeting gets, the more important this is. So in our governance structure, when we're making important decisions, we'll often do just a round where everybody, excuse me, we go through alphabetically and everyone has a chance to either share their opinion or pass. And that's a really great way to just make sure that everybody has a chance to speak, who might not be willing to cut in or raise their hand. But it does take a lot of time. So there are some other ways that um, you can kind of structure the conversation as well that we'll talk about later, just to make sure that it's clear for people how to do that, though. Um, Multitasking and not paying attention. This is just a really tough one for your everyday meetings. Um, but I think one of the things that I want to talk about in this presentation is that like it really depends on what the meeting is. If you know it's going to be an important one where big feelings can come up and you really want people to be engaged, there's ways that you can prepare ahead of time to make it more fun and participatory and make sure like that really helps people pay attention more. Um, Zoom fatigue is also a tough one, especially if your job requires you to be in back-to-back meetings. But we find that taking breaks a lot can help, as well as these kind of embodied and grounding activities. A good rule of thumb is to take a 10-minute break every hour. And at Silk, since we have a lot of meetings, we started scheduling our meetings as 50 minutes default to account for this and just give people 10 minutes in between. This is like a setting that you can change in your Google Calendar to just do that automatically. So I would recommend that. Um, Lack of embodiment in an online space. So there are things you can kind of do to remind people that they have bodies. Again, if you have time to prepare, this might look like a short guided meditation at the beginning of the meeting. Sue does a lot of these at the Law Center really well. Um, or if you're not into that, you can also just have it be like a stretch circle where a few volunteers or everybody kind of volunteers to offer a stretch and then we all mirror that. Or you could have it be something more silly, like a funny movement or a noise that we all then copy and kind of go in a circle and do that. And those things just help people feel more grounded and present in the space and also feel more embodied. Okay, so we did start to talk a little bit about accessibility already, with thinking about taking breaks and having multiple ways of participating in meetings. But what else do we need to know in order to maximize the chances that everyone can participate as much as possible? Um, One is having a meeting agenda, uh, and kind of a clear way to know like what are we going to be talking about? What's the order of the topics? And then also how do I add topics to the agenda beforehand, ideally? Um, People's brains just absorb things better when they know what to expect. And this is especially true if you have like neurodivergent folks on your team. And also, whoever is creating the agenda has a lot of power. So it's good to be transparent about that in a worker self-directed org. Talk about your access needs internally in your organization with the people that you'll be meeting with. An access need is something that you need in order to participate. So it's different than big feelings. It's something yeah, that helps you participate. So I've seen organizations where they always share particular access needs for that day, kind of like at the top of every meeting. That's one way to do it. It could be things come up like, I need to leave early to pick up my kid at the 45 mark, or you'll often hear me saying, I'm off camera today because my back hurts, so I'm lying down. And that kind of practice can be really helpful and can also help the facilitator just like plan and understand where people are at. And it normalizes that people have needs and things going on, but that they still want to be there and they're not just disengaged and they'll participate to the extent that they can. Um, In addition to these, like in the moment access needs, it's also helpful to have a broader conversation internally at your org about access needs for meetings. Um, and that would be kind of the space where people could share things like, oh, because of how my brain works, I would prefer if the agenda were formatted in this different way. Or like, actually, I need someone to like summarize next steps in Slack after the meeting and tag me to be able to keep track of the things I'm supposed to do. So that's getting into kind of like workflow stuff a little bit, but people have different access needs, so it's good to know about them. Take breaks every hour, invite different kinds of participation. Um, as I mentioned earlier, this is mostly about internal meetings, but I'll just mention that for bigger sessions where you might not know who's going to be showing up, you would want to kind of like offer a visual description in your intro, say your name when you speak if you're switching from different speakers, um, have translators for language access, and have also a dedicated tech support person who can troubleshoot access needs in the moment. I forgot to mention, but we do have a tech support person here today and an interpreter. Thank you both for being here. If you have any questions or concerns about how to access this session, feel free to message the Selk tech support person. Um, okay. Another topic where it's really important to have a clear conversation internally with your with your coworkers, or maybe multiple conversations that are kind of iterative, is like, how do you want to handle the facilitator role in your organization? So some of the things that you want to make sure to get clear on, this sounds kind of obvious, but who is the facilitator going to be for each meeting? You want to know who's going to facilitate beforehand so that they can prepare and kind of make a clear process for knowing who that will be ahead of time. We sometimes do this as a rotation, but like where different people will facilitate different meetings. But I think with that, ideally, it would still be the same person for at least like a couple months or 6 months, and not rotate every single meeting. Otherwise, people often show up and just like don't know that they're supposed to facilitate and don't prepare ahead of time. Um, in addition to who's going to facilitate, you want to know what are the responsibilities that are expected of the facilitator, in terms of prep work before and after the meeting, keeping track of the meeting notes, maybe scheduling the meetings, or dealing with scheduling changes, summarizing next steps after the meeting. These are all things that might or might not be included in the facilitator role. And then what I want to talk about the most, because it's kind of the least obvious, is what facilitator privileges do we consent to? So for a worker self-directed org, this is really important, because we're all equal, but the facilitator needs to take certain powers. So this might include things like decisions about pacing, how much time to spend on each agenda item and when to move on. It might, or also creating the agenda. Um, it might also include things like delegating for the conversation about a specific topic to continue in another space with fewer people, like, um, and helping make those kinds of process decisions. Like they might say, okay, I think we've gotten a lot of input from all staff about this. Let's delegate this to the housing circle to kind of take this feedback and figure out the best way to implement it. Excuse me, allergies. Um, Keeping time and cutting people off. This is something where it's good to talk about, because if people are just randomly cut off for the first time without expecting it, that can be kind of triggering or upsetting. So you might come up with a norm that, like in this type of meeting, each person has 1 or 2 minutes to speak. Um, And then you might have someone else keep track of the time for you, or you might consent, have everyone consent in advance to being cut off if they get off topic. Um, Asking follow-up questions or otherwise making decisions outside of the regular speaking order structure. So this is another kind of basic but important one because people don't really realize when they're not being clear. This happens all the time where someone will say something and it's not really clear what they're saying, but we just kind of move on. And that feels bad for the person speaking who is not understood, and also for everybody else who doesn't get that important information. So it really helps if the facilitator can kind of notice when that's happening and cut in and ask a clarifying question. Um, and that's like a power that I they need to have, and ideally, you would talk about it beforehand to make them feel empowered to do that. Um, Summarizing decisions or action items after there's been a lot of discussion. Sometimes it's helpful for the facilitator to just like summarize, okay, I think this is what we talked about, and here's where we landed, and just check in to make sure that that's everyone's on the same page about that. And then also kind of sometimes suggesting follow-up work distribution. So yeah, part of the reason why it's important to talk about these privileges beforehand is to make sure that people who are being cut off can understand why, and that it's not personal and they can kind of be anticipating that. But another really important reason is just to empower the facilitator to feel like they can actually do these things, because in a worker self-directed org, it's really easy to feel like, well, I know my voice is not any more important than anyone else's here, so I don't want to make unilateral decisions. And that's a really reasonable and important concern, especially if there's a big conversation and facilitation decisions can make actually a big impact on where we end up. But a lot of the times people, because of that concern, they'll just say, okay, let me pose this question to the group. What should we do next? And that is like not a good question to ask to a big group of people, because it can result in a lot of confusion and wasted time. So as the facilitator, you do have the responsibility to keep the meeting on track, and you need to feel empowered to do that. And that might look like saying, you know, this is actually not the place for this conversation. Can you two coordinate offline? Um, or if there's a really important decision that you don't want to decide on unilaterally, you can use your facilitator power to sort of make decisions that incorporate input but also streamline the process, like using threshold questions, which we'll talk about later. That's a really good tip. Okay. Before we go into the specific tips and tools, I just want to say a little bit about big feelings, because this is something that comes up a lot in worker self-directed orgs when we have to talk about really big issues like our salaries and benefits and programmatic decisions that people care a lot about. Um, so it's normal to have big feelings come up. And as the facilitator, you don't need to panic or freeze. Try the following tips. Um, Slow down and breathe. Maybe have everybody take a breath together. You can use check-ins before deciding on a next step, like using the hand tool on a scale of 1 to 5. How activated is everyone feeling right now? Um, Find the needs and feelings underneath demands. Sometimes people will kind of put their foot down and say, like, I need this to happen. And um, if possible, try to name what's happening for them, or like, so yeah, validating and reflecting back what they're saying, and then if you can pick out a specific feeling, like it sounds like you're really frustrated with this process right now, that can help kind of diffuse the situation. Um, Assume stability instead of fragility. So try to reframe disagreements to feel a little bit less scary and ground everybody in, we have a process for this, we can figure this out. And then, if all else fails, you can always suggest a path to come back to the conversation later when feelings have had time to be processed a little bit.
Erica, we have a couple questions in the chat. Do you want to wait for that towards the end?
Oh, thank you. Uh, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about speaking order. Um, yeah, maybe I can save Bianca's questions for the end if we have time. Um, and yeah, this training is mostly about groups that meet regularly and have recurring dynamics. That's kind of what I'm trying to talk about is like groups at Selk or the whole group of Selk or our client teams. Okay. Um, Specific facilitation tools I want to talk about are right-sizing conversations, opening and closing the meeting, managing speaking order, threshold questions, spectrograms, and fishbowls. So, right sizing the meeting is super important for worker self-directed orgs, and especially when most of your meetings are online. Um, and it's not always easy to figure out what's the right size or space for a meeting, but one of our biggest learnings is that if you know you have to talk about something that's going to bring up big feelings, break it into two and have the first one be a space for sharing your feelings and experiences, and then the second one be a space for making decisions. Um, so explicitly making space for that pre-conversation to share and process big feelings. And this practice just helps make it feel less high stakes when we're actually making the decision and gives people time to process the idea and the big feelings that come up before that happens. So that by the time we're actually voting, people are able to analyze the situation a little bit more clearly. Um, so anytime you kind of have an inkling, like like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. I know whenever we talk about our salaries, people have big feelings, there's disagreement. So instead of ignoring that anxiety, it can kind of prompt you to think, um, instead of just bringing a proposal, let's schedule a meeting beforehand, to just talk about our feelings. This could also look like one-on-one conversations with people who um, you're particularly concerned about or know they've had big feelings in the past. That can be a really helpful way to do it. But yeah, people can't make good decisions if they're really activated and don't have space to process their feelings first. Um, I think we're a little behind time, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I had a really effective one-on-one conversation with my coworker Christine the other day, where I tried to bring a proposal. I thought it was going to be chill, but then big feelings came up, and I kind of reached out to the people afterwards who disagreed with my proposal, and Christine was one of them. And I kind of asked her about like what was it that made you not agree with my proposal, and she was able to share through that and realize that, she was going through an unrelated interpersonal conflict with a neighbor where she felt like she had been too trusting. And so that was kind of clouding her view of the proposal. And we talked through it, and she remembered and recentered that trusting people is an important core value of hers. And so then we made a few amendments and brought the proposal again, and Christine voted yes. And yeah, I really appreciate Christine giving me permission to share this example because it's not about her and it's really not uncommon. People vote with what they're going through or their past experiences all the time. So having that space to work through it together, and find the important information in those experiences, but not let them cloud the current decision can make all the difference. Opening and closing the meetings. Um, we talked about how to combat Zoom fatigue and multitasking. Um, Opening the meeting in a good way is really powerful way to do this because it sets the tone and the vibe and makes people feel comfortable and bring their personhood, be in their bodies. So always start with introductions if there's new people coming into the space or people don't know each other, and that kind of helps people feel acknowledged and welcomed into the space. Check-ins are also a good way to open a meeting. There's different theories around this because we love a fun check-in question at the Law Center, but it's also great if you can incorporate way for people to bring what's going on in their life that they're bringing into the meeting. That might be through access needs at the top of the meeting. For meetings that are going to be kind of particularly tough or emotional, it's often helpful to add an extra layer of arriving with like a grounding activity. So that could be the 5-minute guided meditation or stretch circle or silly noise circle. And then for the closing, if you have time, it's great to go around and kind of have people share something that's sticking with them. But usually we don't have time for that. So sometimes we'll just kind of offer up a prompt and have people share in the chat, like, what's one word or an emoji for how you're feeling right now? Um, Managing speaking order. So at Selk, some of the common tools that we use are just an alphabetical round. We'll do, you can read about our decision-making process in our wiki if you're not, if you want. Um, it's all our policies are online, but we'll do like a round of questions and then a round of feedback and then a round of objections when we're making a decision. Um, but we'll also use rounds for discussions sometimes. But again, this takes a lot of time, especially if there's a lot of people there. So sometimes for a more discussion-centered meeting, we'll use a stack system where what you do is just type stack into the chat if you want to speak, and then the facilitator will take note of that and manage the speaking order. I would recommend you start by trying it just that way, and then as a next step, you can incorporate direct response or clarifying questions. And so then if someone types that into the chat, then they can kind of cut the line in order to respond to the specific things that are being talked about. So that kind of helps the conversation flow more naturally by fully fleshing out one topic at a time, while still having a speaking order that feels fair and structured. Yeah, having people type that something into the chat, it helps because then you have a record, right, of like, this is the order, and sometimes the facilitator will miss things and then other people will be like, oh, you missed my turn, but or you missed someone else's turn. And that happens, but just having it on paper, I think helps people also, it also helps people like once they type stack into the chat, then they can actually listen to what's happening because they know they're on deck to speak. Um, yeah, there's a lot of other decision-making structures that are good too, but the important thing here is not necessarily the specific structure you choose, but just having a clear system and explaining it and making that be clear to everyone in the meeting. Okay, threshold questions are a really great way to encourage participation and get more information for yourself as the facilitator about where to guide the conversation without just opening up more uncertainty. So, for example, let's say we're having a really important meeting, we're working on our organizational budget. You're noticing that the conversation is starting to revolve around one particular line item, um, which healthcare plan to choose among 5 different options. They range from 50K to 200K. So this is kind of like, yes, this is a large amount of money, but at the same time, our overall organizational budget is 2 million. So it's only a small part of that. How do you kind of manage the time? As the facilitator, maybe you're not sure whether to allow the conversation to continue or try to move on and talk about the rest of the budget. So you might be able to come up with a potential plan in your head and you want to propose it to the group. Like maybe you're thinking, okay, we can kick this over to the admin circle and have them research each option a little bit more because we don't have all the answers to all the questions that have come up about it. And then also have them come back to this same circle next month and propose their top choice and talk more about it then. Um, So how do you propose this plan and get group buy-in while also figuring out if you're missing anything important that would impact the plan? Like maybe there's a deadline to choose the healthcare plan that's 2 weeks from now that you don't know about. So on screen, let's look at two different ways that you might do this. The one on the left says, what do you all think about this plan? And then the one on the right says, here's my plan. Does anyone have major concerns about moving forward? Um, so hopefully it should be clear. I think the one on the right will get a better response and give the facilitator more information. You could even say, does anyone raise your hand if you have major concerns moving forward with this plan? So that's introducing a threshold, which is the major concerns level. So if you don't have major concerns, then you don't say anything, um, and we can move forward with it. But if you do have major concerns, then this is a way to make sure that people have the chance to voice those concerns. Um, so yeah, this is a great tool for getting feedback without having it be too open-ended, because with the what do you all think about this question, nobody might answer, or somebody might answer who doesn't feel that strongly about it, but just is uncomfortable with pauses. um, But if everyone is cool with the plan, that also might not be clear to you based on the answers. So yeah, just phrasing your questions in this way can be really helpful. Um, and my coworkers just did a whole session on threshold questions and facilitating group processes. So that was recorded, and you should check that out if you're interested in learning more about it. Another tool that we use a lot at the Law Center that helps kind of, it's good for online spaces and helps show where's there's alignment and disagreement is the spectrogram. And this is really great for bigger picture convos, again, where they're important. You have time to prepare beforehand, and you want to understand the nuances kind of where the group is at and what folks are agreeing and disagreeing about. So in some ways, this is kind of the opposite of a threshold question. It's you want to see the whole picture rather than just one snapshot. Um, so the way that we do this online is that we prepare a Google slideshow ahead of time with this kind of continuum, and we add everybody's picture to the slide, and then in the moment, during the facilitation, we'll share out the slideshow to the group and have everyone open it up separately on their computers and go in and move their own picture to where they are on the continuum. Um, you might have done this in person, like in a real room. It's like, go to that side if you think this, and go to that side if you think the opposite, or somewhere in the middle, stand in the middle if you're somewhere in the middle. Um, so this is the online version of that. And then we often will ask people who are on the extreme ends to kind of just share more about why they feel strongly or where they're at. Um, and maybe open it up if anybody in the middle wants to share as well. And this is a great way to get information about how the group is feeling and also just help people feel like their voices are heard on an issue. without taking up a ton of time by asking each person individually. And if you're interested in this and other like visual tools that you can use to facilitate meetings, we also just did a training on that, engaging meetings with visual thinking. So I think the recording will be up at some point in the near future. Um, This is a facilitation tool I learned from our friends at Aorta in their basic facilitation training. So shout out to them. They talk about building a gentle ramp to help people form their own opinions about a topic in real time. So I like to combine this with the spectrogram activity. Um, and basically, they say that it's helpful to ask people first about their observations and then move on to their feelings and then finally their opinion. Because if you just start with the opinion, people might not know the answer yet. They might not have an opinion or they might not have thought it out fully. So, um, for example, you might do a spectrogram if we're trying to get to the question of like, should SELC contribute to a retirement plan for staff? We might start with a spectrogram on this observational statement. I'm currently working towards retirement. That's something that people should already know about whether they're doing it or not, and they don't have to think too hard, but they can kind of share more about where they're at, and everyone can see um, and get more information about that, like who is saving for retirement, who isn't saving, why are they doing that? In the next slide, we would do another spectrogram that would move up this gentle ramp into the I feel. So I put on here, I feel sad that not all staff are
Hey, I can't
currently,
get my heroes. Nice to see you again.
oh, I think someone's on off mute.
Yeah, I was not expecting that, but I was glad
Jaden,
though, because
can you hear it?
Oh, I think they muted themselves. Thanks. Um, okay, so this next slide, we would do another spectrogram focusing on feelings. Um, it could be, I feel sad that not all staff are currently able to save for retirement. And in the sharing portion of this spectrogram, you might hear some people feel sad. They're noticing that on the last slide that people of color staff are not investing in particular for retirement. Or other people might say, I don't feel sad because I don't think we should be saving money and investing it into the evil stock market. Um, or maybe they think we can rely on each other in other ways outside of retirement. So it just kind of gives you more information and also allows a chance for people to focus on their feelings. And then in the final spectrogram, we would get to the opinion. I think SELC should contribute to staff retirement plans. And again, there would be more information that comes out here, like maybe some people felt sad in the last slide, but they don't think that SELC can afford to contribute to a retirement plan for all staff. So going through this whole process can help people build out their opinions over the course of a meeting. Okay, the last tool I want to talk about is the fishbowl. This is a good one for facilitating kind of a lively debate where some people have strong opinions and more information than others, and other people just more want to listen and kind of like learn from that debate. So in a fishbowl, you can have 2 to 4 people having a conversation while the audience sits around them and listens. And online, you can do this with just spotlighting the people who are in the middle, right? Um, and if someone is in the audience is moved to say something, they can enter the conversation by tapping someone out. So, like yeah, in Zoom, you can have the facilitator manage spotlighting people and then removing spotlights as different people want to join or exit the conversation. And everybody else who's not spotlighted is just listening. And then if they want to join the conversation, they can just say in the chat that they want to join. Okay, to wrap up, I want to share this metaphor that facilitation is like tending to a garden. So, what do we mean by that? If you've ever had a garden, you know that some plants grow like weeds and don't need much attention from you, and then others require careful nurturing. So, there might be some recurring internal meetings where you have clear practices in place. There's a lot of energy and excitement from others, and you don't really need to prepare that much. But then there's other types of meetings that really do need your care and attention and planning. And for these meetings, making a facilitation plan beforehand with activities and check-ins really helps a lot. And this is especially important for those sensitive conversations like about our salaries or organizational strategy that might be challenging and bring up big feelings. Um, Having a green thumb requires continual attention. So it's not just about planning, it's also about monitoring and looking for signs that there's something off happening and then kind of responding to those needs. So that might look like interpersonal conflicts or work not getting done properly. Um, if you make a mistake, that's okay. Plants are mostly pretty resilient, so just try again and don't shy away from those tough conversations. Sometimes you might want to let the soil rest, or you just need to sit back and wait for your plants to grow. So, similarly, sometimes you need time for a big conversation that brings up a lot of feelings to kind of percolate through the org and have people process that. And then good compost can be added. So that's background conversations in smaller groups, trust in your group. All these things are foundational to having a healthy vegetable garden. But with care, you'll have food to sustain yourselves and the warmth that comes from knowing you grew it yourself. Okay, this event was part of our grassroots fundraising campaign, All Hands on Deck. So we are asking for your donations if you can. Um, it helps us keep doing events like this and pays our salaries. And we also have a solidarity partner, Weedlaco Mushrooms, which is a worker-owned urban farm. They'll get 10% of everything we raise. Thank you so much to our campaign sponsors. We have 2 more events coming up. One is Sparkly Charms for Serious Times, which is an online training. And then we have our in-person community party next weekend. So would love to see you all there. Please RSVP if you want to come. And we'll end with some Q&A. So feel free to share questions, or also I want to hear any opinions, what resonated for you and what didn't for your org. What other tools do you use in your online meetings and presentations that other people, including myself, would be interested in knowing about? Um, I think there were some questions in the chat I want to come back to. Oh yeah, there was one about who has the chance to facilitate, and do you have any requirements for anyone taking on full team facilitation? We don't. We kind of throw them in there. Um, yeah, we do try to make sure that everyone does some facilitation because we think it's a really important skill for everyone to have in a worker self-directed org. And then the full team facilitation. So like for our general circle meetings, we have a rotating thing every 6 months. It changes. So everybody on staff at some point should have the chance to and have the responsibility to facilitate those. But then for some of the other all staff meetings, it a lot of the times it's based on like what your work is. So like the financial circle people will facilitate a conversation about our finances, for example. But yeah, we try to do also facilitation trainings sometimes, like at our retreats and things. So trying to upskill everybody. Um, Curious about other quick and meaningful ways to close out a conversation. You can also do the opposite of, like I mentioned, the stretch circle or the like silly movement that everybody copies. You can do that at the end of a meeting too. It could be a silly movement, or it could be like a movement that shows how you're feeling right now. Like maybe it's like I'm tired, or like I'm excited. And then everybody copies that. Feel free to drop other suggestions in the chat for closing as well. I see a lot of discussion about um, the rounds question. I think we covered that though. I'm not sure. Feel free to drop another question if I missed something. Mm. How do you delegate who takes on the labor of summarizing next steps and reminding folks of their responsibilities? Yeah, that's a good question. Um, it's kind of iterative. I just brought a proposal in our land stewardship circle. So we do it like every circle kind of manages that stuff for themselves. But in our land stewardship circle, we just created um, a new structure for our client teams where we have specific roles on each team. So one is the facilitator, and then one is the coordinator. And the coordinator does the following up and reminding folks about next steps, and kind of like even digesting the meeting and figuring out what are the next steps and then sharing that, which is not an easy job. So people sign up for that, but we try to kind of balance it out so that different teams have different facilitators and coordinators. When someone is facilitating and they do that thing where they ask the group what they want to do, how do you gently and politely tell them that's a horrible facilitator move? Um, you could try to model asking a threshold question and being like, how about um, if we do this, and maybe if anyone strongly disagrees, please raise your hand. Or you could try to talk to them afterwards about it. That's probably, excuse me, the best, is not to do it in the meeting where it might embarrass them, but kind of offer them some loving and gentle feedback. Yeah, so ETL tech support's also saying it can be helpful to just say, I think it would be helpful if you made a call. There's too many of us. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're out of time. So thank you everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. I hope it was helpful.